By every rule of the war, the M4 Sherman should not have survived a Tiger. One gunner knew that, so he stopped fighting the Tiger and used an impossible trick to turn the Sherman into a Tiger killer. What he found wasn't in any manual, and once you see it, the entire myth of the Tiger collapses. By every rule of the war, the M4 Sherman should not have survived a Tiger, and every American tanker in Normandy knew it. This wasn't rumor, it wasn't exaggeration, it was written into the numbers. A German Tiger could destroy a Sherman from over a mile away. Its 88mm gun fired with devastating accuracy, punching through armor long before its target could even respond. The Sherman, by contrast, needed to close the distance to less than 300 yards. 3 football fields. Close enough for the Tiger to see you clearly. Close enough to die before your shot ever mattered. This wasn't combat. It was a mathematical imbalance. American doctrine tried to compensate for that imbalance with production. 5 Shermans for every German tank. Speed of manufacture over strength of design. Reliability over survivability. On paper, the math worked. In reality, it meant something else entirely. It meant that if you were sitting inside a Sherman, the system had already decided your role. You were not expected to win the duel. You were expected to overwhelm it eventually, or burn trying. Normandy made that logic collapse. The terrain stripped away maneuver. Hedgerows rose 8 feet high, thick and tangled, turning the countryside into narrow corridors of death. Visibility dropped to dozens of yards. Approach lanes became predictable, and predictability was exactly what the Tiger needed. From hull-down positions, German crews waited. Their optics turned movement into targets. Their firing lanes overlapped perfectly. Shermans advanced the way the manuals demanded, in line, evenly spaced, disciplined. To the Tiger, that discipline looked like obedience, and obedience made American armor easy to kill. One shot, one burning tank, then another. Crews never saw what hit them. They only saw the result. Doctrine did not adapt. Doctrine doubled down. Advance, suppress, concentrate fire, and die in formation. This is the part of the war history often skips, not because it's unknown, but because it's uncomfortable. American tankers were not losing because they lacked courage. They were losing because they were fighting correctly, following the rules, trusting the system, believing that eventually numbers would win. But numbers don't matter when geometry favors only one side. And somewhere in Normandy, one gunner understood that truth before anyone else did. He didn't look at the Tiger and see an unbeatable machine. He looked at it and saw assumptions. Assumptions about range, about angles, about how an enemy was supposed to approach. And he realized something the manuals never taught. The Tiger was not invincible. It was optimized. Optimized for a fight everyone kept giving it. And if you stopped fighting that fight, if you changed the rules just slightly, the entire balance collapsed. That realization didn't come from bravery. It didn't come from better equipment. It came from understanding the system that was killing American crews and seeing where it could break. And once that crack appeared, the Tiger was no longer a predator. It was a problem, one that could be solved. To understand why the Tiger dominated Normandy, you have to forget the myths. It wasn't unbeatable because it was heavier. It wasn't feared because of propaganda. And it wasn't winning because American crews were careless. The Tiger won because the battlefield rewarded exactly what it was built to do. At its core, the Tiger was not a breakthrough tank. It was a defensive weapons platform. Its long-barreled 88mm gun was designed for range and precision. Its optics were among the best in the world, turning distant movement into clear, stable targets. And its frontal armor was thick enough to ignore most return fire at the distances where it fought best. In open terrain, that advantage was already deadly. In Normandy, it became absolute. The bocage, the dense hedgerow country of northern France, was not flat farmland. It was a maze. Thick earthen banks, reinforced by roots and brush, cut the land into narrow compartments. Lanes curved unpredictably. Visibility collapsed to tens of yards. For an advancing force, this was a nightmare. For a defending one, it was a gift. The Tiger didn't need to maneuver much. It didn't need to chase targets. It needed to wait. German crews positioned their tanks hull down, exposing only the turret while the bulk of the vehicle remained protected. From these positions, they controlled approach lanes that attackers were forced to use. Every lane became a firing solution. Every movement became predictable. This is where American doctrine failed its crews. Sherman units were trained to advance in formation. Spacing was standardized. Movement was coordinated. In theory, this ensured control and prevented chaos. In practice, it meant that Tigers knew exactly where Shermans would appear next. A column advancing through hedgerows could not spread out freely. There were only so many gaps, only so many usable lanes. To the Tiger's gunner, this turned the battlefield into a shooting gallery. Targets arrived one at a time, at known distances, from known directions. The Sherman's strengths, speed, reliability, numbers meant very little in this environment. Speed didn't matter when there was nowhere to maneuver. Numbers didn't matter when only one tank could enter a lane at a time. Reliability didn't matter when a single hit meant instant destruction. The Tiger's gun fired once, then again. Each shot was deliberate, each hit catastrophic. From the outside, it looked like German engineering superiority. From the inside, it was something else entirely. It was a system doing exactly what it was designed to do, because the enemy was cooperating with it. American crews followed doctrine because doctrine promised survival through order. But order created patterns, and patterns could be exploited. The Tiger did not need to be everywhere. It only needed to be where doctrine said the Shermans would go. This is why so many engagements ended the same way. Shermans advanced. Tigers fired. American armor burned. And when commanders reviewed the losses, the conclusion was always the same. The solution must be more of the same. More tanks, more pressure, more adherence to the book. What no one wanted to admit was that the book itself was the problem, because the Tiger wasn't winning by breaking rules. It was winning by obeying them better. Its crews trusted their firing tables, trusted their optics, trusted their positioning, and most importantly, they trusted that the enemy would keep attacking the way doctrine demanded. This is the critical insight most accounts miss. The Tiger's dominance was conditional. It depended on the enemy approaching from predictable directions, at predictable times, under predictable constraints. It depended on one assumption above all else, that American tanks would keep trying to fight it on its terms. But assumptions are fragile things, and once one crew stopped accepting them, the entire system began to crack, because the Tiger was never built to answer multiple threats at once. Its turret traverse was powerful but slow. Its mass gave it protection but limited agility. Its design favored control, not chaos. The moment it was forced to choose, the moment it had to react instead of anticipate, its dominance evaporated. That realization did not come from doctrine. It came from understanding how systems fail. And in Normandy, one gunner understood that the Tiger's greatest strength, its control over the engagement, was also its greatest vulnerability. All that was left was to prove it. American tank crews did not die in Normandy because they lacked discipline. They died because discipline was treated as a substitute for adaptation. AC, armored doctrine was built for clarity, clear formations, clear spacing, clear chains of command. On training grounds, it worked. On open terrain, it worked. On paper, it made sense. In the hedgerows of Normandy, it became lethal. Doctrine demanded that Shermans advance in line, evenly spaced, maintaining visual and radio contact. The purpose was control to prevent confusion, friendly fire, and fragmentation. But control has a cost. In the bocage, there were only so many places a tank could go, only so many lanes wide enough to move through, only so many breaks in the hedges that could support armor. Formation turned flexibility into rigidity. When a column advanced, every tank behind the lead vehicle inherited its fate. If the first tank was destroyed, the second had to move forward to identify the threat. Then the third. Each movement revealed the next target. Doctrine assumed that suppressive fire and numbers would overwhelm resistance. But suppression requires visibility, and numbers require space. Normandy offered neither. When Tigers engaged, American commanders faced an impossible choice. If they halted, they surrendered initiative and left the lead tanks exposed. If they advanced, they fed more vehicles into the same firing lane. Either way, doctrine demanded obedience. The result was repetition, the same formations, the same approaches, the same outcomes. After-action reports rarely blamed the system. They blamed circumstances, poor visibility, bad terrain, superior enemy weapons, anything except the idea that the rules themselves might be wrong. This was not ignorance. It was institutional inertia. Doctrine exists to reduce uncertainty. Changing it introduces risk. And in war, risk carries careers, reputations, and courts-martial. So crews followed orders. They advanced as trained. They reported contacts. They requested smoke and artillery support, and they died. What doctrine failed to account for was time, not hours or days, seconds. A Tiger's firing cycle was brutally efficient. Spot, range, fire. The Sherman's response cycle was slower. Detection, communication, maneuver. By the time the system reacted, the damage was already done. Doctrine assumed that coordination would compensate for vulnerability. But coordination takes time, and time was exactly what the Tiger denied. This is where the gap between doctrine and reality became fatal. The Tiger did not fight the system. It exploited it. It relied on the enemy to move as expected, to approach as trained, to respond as written, and as long as American crews obeyed those expectations, the Tiger remained dominant. The manuals did not consider what happened if a tank did not advance when ordered. They did not describe what to do when breaking formation became the safest option. They certainly did not encourage initiative that contradicted the book. In theory, initiative existed. In practice, deviation was punished. This created a silent tension inside American units. Tankers could see what was happening. They watched vehicles ahead of them burn. They understood that advancing meant exposure, but stopping meant insubordination. The system placed crews in a position where survival and obedience diverged. Most chose obedience, not because they believed it was right, but because it was expected. This is the part of the story that is hardest to accept. The Tiger did not win because it was unstoppable. It won because the system on the other side refused to change fast enough. Doctrine assumed that problems could be solved by more of the same, more tanks, more pressure, more adherence. But in Normandy, repetition did not create success. It created patterns, and patterns are the raw material of defeat. The Tiger thrived on predictability. It needed the enemy to behave consistently. As long as American crews kept advancing in line, kept funneling through the same lanes, kept responding by the book, the outcome was inevitable. This was not a failure of courage. It was a failure of imagination. The war had changed. The terrain had changed. The enemy had adapted. The doctrine had not. Somewhere between the burning wrecks and the unread manuals, one gunner reached a different conclusion. If following the rules guaranteed death, then the rules were the problem. And if the system could not protect its crews, then the system had to be corrected from the inside by those who were dying under it. That realization did not come with permission. It came with urgency. And it marked the moment when obedience stopped being a virtue, because the next step was not to fight harder, it was to fight differently. The solution did not begin with courage. It began with refusal. Refusal to accept that the outcome was fixed. Refusal to believe that survival depended on luck or sacrifice. Refusal to keep feeding the same geometry to the same gun. One gunner looked at the Tiger and stopped asking how to destroy it. Instead, he asked a different question. What does this machine need in order to dominate the fight? The answer was not armor. It was not firepower. It was not reputation. It was control. The Tiger dominated because it controlled distance, timing, and direction. It decided when the engagement began. It decided where it happened. And it decided which target appeared first, As long as that control remained intact, the outcome was predictable. So the trick was not to overpower the tiger. The trick was to take control away from it. This is where doctrine stopped being useful and engineering took over. The tiger's strengths were impressive, but they were conditional. Its gun was devastating at long range, but slow to reposition. Its turret was powerful but heavy. Its hull was well protected but not agile. Most importantly, it could only face one direction at a time. That limitation rarely mattered because doctrine ensured it never had to. But if that condition changed, everything changed with it. The impossible trick was simple in concept and brutal in execution. Do not approach from one direction. Do not arrive one at a time. Do not fight for distance. Force the tiger to choose. The plan depended on three elements: angles, timing, and smoke. Smoke came first. Not to blind the tiger completely, but to break its confidence. To strip away the clarity its optics provided. To turn long-range certainty into short-range confusion. Smoke erased the tiger's greatest advantage: anticipation. Next came angles. Instead of advancing in line, Shermans would approach from separate lanes, not widely spaced but deliberately separated, each route chosen to converge on the tiger within a narrow window of time. This was not flanking as doctrine understood it. This was convergence. The goal was not to surround the tiger slowly. It was to arrive almost simultaneously, just seconds apart. That window mattered. The tiger's turret traverse was not instant. Powered rotation took time. Manual rotation took even longer. If one Sherman appeared alone, it would die. If two appeared sequentially, the tiger would adapt. But if three appeared within the same moment, the math broke. The tiger could not engage all of them at once. Finally, timing. Timing was the most dangerous variable. Arrive too early, and the tiger eliminated you before the others entered range. Arrive too late, and you watched your partners burn. Every movement had to be synchronized. Every turn calculated. Every second accounted for. This was not improvisation. It was precision. The moment the attack began, there was no room for hesitation. One Sherman advanced frontally, deliberately exposing itself just enough to demand attention. Smoke rounds bloomed across the tiger's field of view. The tiger fired blind, reacting instead of controlling. At the same time, two Shermans broke cover from different angles. Not circling, not probing, charging. Speed mattered now. The faster they moved, the less time the tiger had to respond. The less time its turret had to rotate, the fewer decisions it could make. For the first time, the tiger was reacting under pressure. When the first flanking shot struck, it did not kill the tiger. That was never guaranteed. What it did was force a decision. The turret began to rotate, and that rotation exposed the tiger to the second angle. A second shot struck where the armor thinned, not because the Sherman was stronger, but because the geometry allowed it. Metal jammed. Movement slowed. In that moment, the tiger lost control. It was no longer dictating the fight. It was trying to survive it. Fire came from the third direction. Then again, not aimed at invincibility, but at vulnerability. This is the part often misunderstood. The trick did not rely on a single perfect shot. It relied on overload. Too many threats. Too little time. The tiger's design assumed order. The trick introduced chaos. And chaos is where optimized systems fail. When the tiger finally stopped moving, it was not because it had been outgunned. It was because it had been outthought. The impossible trick was never about turning a Sherman into something it wasn't. It was about forcing the tiger into a fight it was never designed to win. Once the geometry changed, the myth collapsed quickly. What had looked like superiority was revealed as dependence. Dependence on predictable enemies, predictable terrain, predictable doctrine. The moment those assumptions disappeared, the tiger became just another machine, dangerous but finite. This is why the trick mattered. Not because it was clever, not because it was brave, but because it exposed a truth the manuals never admitted. Victory does not belong to the strongest machine. It belongs to the side that understands the system and knows how to break it. And once that understanding existed, the war could not return to what it had been, because the tiger had been solved. The first time the trick was tested, nothing went according to plan. That was always the risk. On paper, the geometry worked. In reality, war rarely respects clean diagrams. The moment the Shermans moved, everything became compressed. Distance, time, and decision. Engines roared through narrow hedgerow lanes, tracks biting into soft Norman soil. Visibility collapsed as smoke drifted and folded unpredictably in the morning air. This was the most dangerous phase of the maneuver. Before contact, the Tiger still held the advantage. One mistake, one delay, one wrong turn, and the entire plan would unravel. The frontal Sherman advanced first, deliberately exposing itself just enough to be seen, not to attack, to demand attention. The Tiger responded immediately. The sound came before the impact, a sharp, flat crack that cut through the hedgerows. The shot missed wide. That miss mattered more than a hit. It confirmed that the Tiger was firing blind, reacting instead of choosing. But blind fire did not mean harmless fire. Every second the frontal Sherman remained exposed was borrowed time. Behind the smoke, the two flanking Shermans accelerated. They were no longer maneuvering. They were committing. The lanes were tighter than expected. Turns came faster than rehearsed. One tank slowed briefly to avoid bogging down. That delay almost killed the plan. Seconds stretched. The Tiger's turret began to rotate. For a moment, it looked like the geometry would fail. The first flanking Sherman broke cover and fired. The round struck the Tiger's side hull, exactly where the calculations predicted. And it did nothing. The armor held. This was the moment the trick nearly died. The plan had never depended on a single penetrating shot, but the psychology of the moment did. Against a Tiger, a failed hit usually meant one thing: you were already dead. The Tiger's turret continued to turn. The long barrel began to align. If it completed that rotation, the flanking Sherman would be destroyed before it could reload. This was the margin no manual accounted for. Not courage, not doctrine, timing. Then the second flanking Sherman appeared. Not seconds later, almost simultaneously. That was the difference. The Tiger had committed to the first threat. It could not disengage fast enough to address the second. A second shot slammed into the turret ring. Metal screamed. The rotation stuttered, then stopped. The gun froze halfway through its arc. In that instant, the engagement flipped. The Tiger was no longer controlling range or direction. It was trapped inside its own mass. The frontal Sherman advanced again, firing smoke and high explosive rounds to keep pressure constant. Now the Tiger was surrounded by problems instead of solutions. Fire came from three directions, not aimed with desperation, aimed with intent. The Tiger attempted to pivot its hull, but the soft ground resisted. Its weight, once an advantage, became inertia. A rear shot struck the engine deck. Flames erupted. The Tiger was not destroyed instantly. That mattered too. It meant the result was not luck. It meant the system had been overwhelmed, not surprised. When the crew finally abandoned the tank, the battlefield fell silent in a way that felt unfamiliar. For the first time, the Tiger had not dictated the outcome. But this was not the end of the test. The true proof came minutes later. Radio traffic broke the moment of relief. Another Tiger, another engagement, more Shermans burning elsewhere along the line. This is where the trick moved from theory to doctrine. The same geometry was applied again, under pressure, without preparation, with exhaustion setting in. Smoke first, angles second, timing always. The Tiger responded the same way. It fired at the most obvious threat. It rotated toward what it could see, and it exposed itself to what it could not. The second Tiger fell faster than the first, not because the Shermans improved, because the Tiger's assumptions were already broken. By now, something important had changed. The Tiger was no longer fighting doctrine. It was fighting uncertainty. It could no longer predict approach lanes. It could no longer trust its firing order. Every engagement now carried doubt. That doubt mattered. Optimized systems fail quickly, once confidence erodes. The Tiger had been designed for control. The trick denied it that control completely. What followed was not a sudden collapse of German armor, it was something quieter and more decisive. American crews began to adapt, not because they were told to, but because they had seen the proof. The trick spread informally at first, from crew to crew, from radio call to radio call. Smoke, angles, timing, the vocabulary of survival changed, and so did outcomes. This is where most retellings stop, at the moment of victory, but the real significance lies elsewhere. The trick did not succeed because it was clever. It succeeded because it worked under stress. It survived failure. It absorbed mistakes. It functioned when conditions were imperfect, that is, the standard doctrine must meet. The Tiger had not been beaten by firepower. It had been beaten by a method that tolerated chaos better than it did. And once that method existed, the battlefield could never return to what it had been. The Tiger was still dangerous, still lethal, still feared, but it was no longer inevitable. The myth depended on predictability, and predictability was gone. What remained was a machine forced to fight without control, against enemies who had learned how to take it away. The war did not change overnight, but from that moment forward, one truth became impossible to ignore. The Tiger could be killed, not by being stronger, not by being braver, but by refusing to fight the war the way the Tiger expected it to be fought. And that refusal, that single correction, was more powerful than any new tank rolling off an assembly line. What confirmed the trick wasn't victory, it was recognition. On the German side, Tiger crews understood exactly what had happened. They did not see it as bad luck. They did not dismiss it as inferior crews making mistakes, and they did not blame equipment failure. They recognized a shift in the fight. The Tiger had been designed around a simple expectation that the enemy would approach in predictable ways, under predictable pressure. For years, that assumption had held. Now it no longer did. From the Tiger commander's perspective, the change was immediate and unsettling. The battlefield no longer presented clear firing lanes. Targets no longer appeared one at a time. Smoke obscured optics at the exact moment decisions mattered most. The Tiger was forced to react without certainty, and reaction was never its strength. German armored doctrine prized control, positioning, fields of fire, calculated engagement. The Tiger embodied that philosophy perfectly. But once American crews began forcing simultaneous threats, the Tiger's advantages inverted. Its weight limited, rapid repositioning. Its turret, once a symbol of dominance, became a bottleneck. Its reliance on precision became a liability when precision disappeared. From inside the Tiger, the fight felt different. The gunner no longer waited for clean shots. The commander no longer dictated the engagement. Every second became improvisation. This is where the myth fractured. The Tiger's reputation depended on inevitability, on the belief that once it appeared, the outcome was already decided. But inevitability collapses the moment choice disappears, and the trick removed choice entirely. German crews did not need manuals to understand this. They could feel it. When a Tiger was forced to engage multiple angles at once, it entered a losing equation, not because it was weak, but because it was optimized for a world that no longer existed. This recognition mattered more than any after-action report. It meant the trick was not a one-time anomaly. It was a systemic correction. Once a system's core assumption fails, no amount of discipline can restore it. This is why the effect spread so quickly. American crews did not need to be retrained formally. They only needed to see it work. German crews did not need propaganda to fear it. They only needed to experience it once. The battlefield adjusted faster than doctrine ever could, and in that adjustment, something rare happened. Both sides understood the same truth at the same time. The Tiger had not been surpassed. It had been understood. This is the part history often simplifies. It prefers new weapons, new machines, clear turning points, but wars rarely change that way. They change when assumptions collapse. The trick did not end the Tiger's effectiveness overnight, but it ended its certainty. From that moment forward, Every Tiger engagement carried doubt. Would the enemy advance predictably? Or would they split, converge, and overload? That doubt slowed decisions, and slowed decisions kill optimized systems. The Tiger was still dangerous, but danger without control is not dominance, it is risk. This is why the trick mattered beyond a single battlefield. It proved that doctrine could be challenged from below, that systems could be corrected by those trapped inside them, that survival sometimes required disobedience, not recklessness, but understanding. The validation did not come from medals or reports. It came from silence on the battlefield, from tigers that stopped advancing confidently, from crews that hesitated before committing, from engagements that no longer followed familiar patterns. The war had shifted not because one side gained superior machines, but because one side learned faster, and learning is contagious. Once a system is exposed, it cannot be unseen. The Tiger's greatest weakness was never its armor. It was its dependence on an enemy who played by the rules. When that enemy stopped cooperating, the myth could not survive. What remained was reality, a powerful machine, fighting without certainty in a war that no longer obeyed its logic. Wars are not changed by single victories. They are changed when ideas survive contact with reality. The impossible trick did not matter because it destroyed a tiger. It mattered because it exposed a truth that could not be ignored. The tiger had never been invincible. It had only been protected by assumptions. Assumptions about how enemies would approach, about how doctrine would be followed, about how battles were supposed to unfold. Once those assumptions collapsed, the tiger became what it always was, a powerful machine with limits. What followed was not immediate transformation. Doctrine never changes quickly. But something more important happened first. Crews began to think differently. They stopped asking how to win by the book. They started asking how the enemy expected them to fight. And then they did the opposite. This shift did not require new factories. It did not require new armor. It required understanding. As the campaign continued, solutions that once seemed radical became formalized. Flanking principles were written down. Smoke was no longer just concealment, but a weapon. Timing and convergence became deliberate tools, not improvisations. Soon after, new machines arrived. Tanks with guns capable of killing tigers frontally at range. Vehicles designed not to challenge the myth, but to make it irrelevant. The tiger did not disappear, but it no longer dictated the battlefield. By then, the war had already moved past it. This is how technological myths end. Not with a dramatic collapse, but with quiet redundancy. What once dominated becomes understood. What is understood becomes manageable. And what is manageable stops shaping outcomes. The most important lesson of Normandy was not about tanks. It was about systems. The Tiger was a masterpiece of engineering, but it was also a prisoner of its own design philosophy. It assumed control. It assumed predictability. It assumed obedience. When those assumptions failed, the machine had no answer. The Sherman, by contrast, was never exceptional. It was adaptable. Its strength was not in what it could do alone, but in how it could be used when thinking changed. This is the part history often overlooks. Victory did not come from superior machines alone. It came from learning faster than the enemy, from recognizing when doctrine had become a liability, from allowing those closest to the problem to correct the system. The impossible trick was not a miracle. It was a diagnosis. It identified the real flaw in the war as it was being fought, and once that flaw was named, it could not be unseen. From Normandy onward, the Tiger was no longer a rule of war. It was a case study, a reminder that dominance is temporary, that systems fail when they stop adapting, and that even the most feared machines collapse the moment their logic no longer fits reality. In the end, the Tiger did not lose to a better tank. It lost to better thinking, and that is how wars actually change. Not when new weapons arrive, but when old assumptions die.